Begin the current Daf Mesech Yoma Daf Hey. Begin on the bottom line of Ayin Tesma Beis, where we continue the discussion in the previous Daf regarding the shiurim of the halachas of eating and drinking on Yom Kippurim, regarding the halach of inui, not to drink from lugmov, and not to eat a k'esebas hagasa. Shiur corresponds to Bekazach and Mecheskel to Intam Daf. Also, if anyone wants to still contribute to the Raised campaign for the Grand River Stiebel, which is Baruch Hashem, ongoing, so we greatly appreciate anyone who's contributing towards that. Something we're discussing in today's daf are shiur Torah, the measurements used to calculate various Torah laws, as we discussed in today's daf. The lugma, which was mentioned in the Mishnah, the shiur specified for drinking Yom Kippur, the Gemara is going to qualify exactly what is considered lugma. So the key terms of the concept in today's daf are tafasta meruba tafasta. Tafasta meruba tafasta, when there's a vague halacha, you're going to go ahead and take the smaller, not the larger, because that you know for sure is included. The larger, you don't know if it's definitively included. Chlechil's pras is the halacha of eating something the amount of time that it takes to eat a half of a loaf. The loaf is a loaf that has 2 meals worth of erevin, and half of that is a meal's worth. If you could eat in that amount of time, which the place can say it's around, depending on which opinion, between 2 and 9 minutes, that's the halacha of chlechil's pras. Chiligasa, eating, overeating. Shmei achila, elish machila, let's discuss in today's daf if it's not considered as eating and hence would not qualify as an achila for whatever halachic relevancy that has. So begin the current daf. The bottom line of Ayin Tesma Beis, time you learn the brisa. So this relates directly back to the discussion regarding Kesevas Agasa Yom Kippur. The brisa brings the Rabbi Yoma, he says, as we continue on with Peyam and Aleph, Kol shiur, all the measurements that are mentioned regarding food items, kulam b'kizayis, they're all in the size of an olive, chutz mitumas eichlin, except there's one exception for the food items tumas, where the halacha is that there's a contamination from foods to foods. Shashina kasa b'mashman, where, as the Gemara is going to explain, the pasuk changed in its understanding, and b'shina chacham b'shiurim, and therefore the sages also changed in the measurements of it. And the proof for this, to what I'm saying, that because the pasuk changes its wording, so therefore the Chachamim changed the measurements of it, is Yom Kippurim. And also over there, the Chachamim changed the shiur of what's generally halachically considered as eating, because the pasuk changed in its understanding of how it writes the wording. So the Gemara says, Ma'ishina kazav b'mashmai. What did we find in Yom Kippurim that it changed its wording and therefore Chachamim gave a different measurement than we usually do for food items? It's like we said, the pasuk in Yikar says Malay Sunnah. The pasuk says that if someone's not going to be afflicted, he's violating the laws of Yom Kippurim. It doesn't say Asher Taichel is going to eat, and therefore, since it said Malay Sunnah, it used a different wording. So therefore, we changed the shiur. And it says why did the Chacham change the measurement of eating Yom Kippurim? Kikei Seves, like we said in the previous stuff. Not the shiur b'kizayis. It's not like a regular achila. It has to do with inui, which is, like we said, the Chacham understood that what's considered Yisur B'daita, that calms a person down that is not afflicted, is the shiur of a large day. Now, says the Gemara, my right l'dav Yom Kippur. Why did they have to bring a proof? In other words, what's Yom Kippurim better than the halacha of Tamaz Eichlin? What were you more explicit to show that you had to show? The reasoning is that the pasuk changed more than when it wasn't. By Tuma also we find that the pasuk changes the wording, as the Gemara is about to quote, and therefore the Chacham changed the shiur. So why would I have to go ahead and bring you a Rai L'Dav from Yom Kippurim? So the Gemara, I'll tell you why. If we only came from the fact that the pasuk changed the wording by Tumas Eichlin, Havamina, I would have said that no, there's no deviation, there's no change of the wording. Because Orcha Dekrahu, it's normal to write, as the Gemara is going to shortly quote, Mikala Eichel Asher Ya'achil, which is seemingly the extra words that we expound from, because we find this in by liquids too. We write Mashka Asher Yishasa, so on that we tell you that no, Yom Kippurim, within most definitely the pasuk is changing from the regular wording. It doesn't say that you're not going to eat in Yom Kippurim. It just says you have to be afflicted. Oh, and therefore we see that Chacham changed the shiur. That they're going to tell you that that we see that there is such a concept in the Torah, and therefore by Tumah also it does say a little bit differently than it normally does, because Asher Ya'achil was an unnecessary change of the wording. And therefore, that is why we needed to bring it from Yom Kippurim, because if we only brought it from Yom Tov, we would have said, okay, it's normal to write any food and there will be eaten, just like we said, any beverage that you will drink. But when you see by Yom Kippurim that concept stark, then you could go ahead and apply it the same thing to the laws of Tumas Eichlin too. But now the Gemara says, okay, Tumas Eichlin, this halacha that the food items Tumah, that you could only have to be a transmission of Tumah and food items if it's Kebeya, the size of an egg. Manolam, where do we know that from? You're saying a similar concept that we see that by Yom Kippurim, but what is that source? So I remember this is the pasuk says in the Yikra, it says from any food item that will be eaten. It says that if it's going to come in that water and it's going to become tamei through any type of liquid, that's the halacha of tumas oichel. Now, what does it mean? So it says the Gemara, we're talking about a food item that comes from another food item, right? Because that's it. It's like a double terminology. It's a food item that comes from another food item. What is that? That's Beis Tanagelis. That's the egg of a chicken, which the mother is a food item, and what comes out is also a food item. That's how you know it's the shiur of a kebeya. Says the Gemara, how do you know that? Maybe it's a kid goat. It also says that comes from an eichel. Says the Gemara, no, it's mechus shchita. It's missing shchita. When the food item that was created from it comes out, there is no eichel there at all. Not the mother and not the child, because you have to do shchita. So you can't call it a food item yet. It's not edible yet, because it's less to do shchita. In contrast, an egg doesn't have to have a shchita. So therefore, that's how we know it's referring to an egg. But says the Gemara, a ben pakua is a halacha that if you shecht an animal and you find inside a living animal, which was probably about to be born, the Gemara tells us that the shchita of the mother works for the baby too. So you see that you don't have to do a shchita, and that's a oichel abamach mas oichel. So maybe that's the shiur of tumas oichel. Says the Gemara, no, it's towing kriya, because it's still not edible yet, because the Mishnah there teaches that you have to tear it open and remove the blood of the ben pakur. So it's not ready to be eaten as it is. So therefore, that's why it can't be eaten the ben pakur. It says, okay, so I get it. It's talking about an egg, because the edible egg does not have to be, go ahead and do anything to prepare it to be eaten. But maybe it's the bar yochana, which is a huge bird, as the Gemara says in Mecharis and Zayin Beis, that the egg of this bar yochana actually drowned 60 cities. I mean, it's whether it be an exaggeration or not, but it's a huge bird. Maybe that's the size of a kebeya. How do you know it's the size of a chicken egg? So the Gemara know the famous Talmudic dictum, tafasta meruba like tafasta. You don't grab the larger quantity. Tafasta mu tafasta. You grab the smaller quantity, then you've grabbed something, because you only do what's definitive, what's has to be, which that's the size of a chicken egg. But to say it's a larger share, that you have no right to say, and therefore we're going to say it's that of a chicken. But then it says, well, wait a second, if you're saying the smallest one possible, because to fast the mu'eh, then ve'ema beyasa de tzipor, so you should say it's the egg of a tzipor, the zuta tuva, which is very small, whether it be a hummingbird, whatever it is, but it's a very small bird. How do you know it's the egg of a chicken? Maybe it's the egg of a tzipor. So the Gemara says you're right. Rabbi Vo, he says that actually, meaning that previously this was Rabbi Vo in the name of Rabbi Lazar. Now, because of the question, how do you know that it would mean would mean a chicken egg? Maybe it's some type of other egg. So he says his own interpretation to explain the pasuk that Rabbi Lazar didn't say, and which doesn't have a question on it. He expounds when it says in the pasuk, from any food and that will be eaten. What does that mean? It's it's saying it's a food item that you could eat. That's why it's saying the redundant terminology in one time. The shiur chacham, and the chacham evaluated the throat cannot contain yosim mebeis tanagos. It cannot contain a one shot that you would give a big swallow. What's the shiur that you could hold in your throat is not more than the egg of a chicken. And therefore, that's how they knew from the kol oichel sheyachol that the shiur of tumas oichlin, which is what this pasuk is going on, is the shiur of a kebeya of a chicken, because that's how much the throat could hold at one time. That's how we know this halacha. But again, everything else is that of a kezayis. The Gemara continues now another teaching from Omer Rebbe Lazar. Continue on this halacha of shiurim, on measurements. Someone needs chaylev, forbidden fats, treif. They ate it in today's times. So he has to write down the measurement of the quantity of how many ounces, how much did he eat. Why? Maybe there's going to be another court later on, and they're going to go ahead and increase the measurement, which the Gemara is going to explain exactly what does this mean. As the Gemara asks, wait a second, my yarmah b'shiur, what does it mean that they're going to add the measurements? In other words, he's saying that right now there's no chatas, there's no karbonis that a person brings. But in the future he's going to have to bring a carbon. But he has to write down how much he ate because they might increase the measurement. So the Gemara says, Ina. Oh, so the Gemara is going to mention that also. Right. But even if they're going to, the question is how are they going to measure that shiur? The concept is halacha mishpasim, but how much is included there. So the Gemara, this is what the Gemara is discussing. If you think to say that, wait a second, that he might be chayv carbon even on the small kazayas, in other words, if someone eats, let's say, less than the kazayas bisman hazeh, so you would think, okay, he's potter. No. So that's Rabbi Elazar is coming to say, he should write, I ate this amount. Why? Because maybe the base of Mikdash is going to be built speedily in his days, and then there's going to be the courts, and there's going to be a new halacha, and they're going to say, you chayiv a carbon even on the small kazayas. And therefore, you should write down how much, because they might hold that we know kazayas, but how much? What size of kazayas? Is it a large kazayas? Is it a medium-sized kazayas? Is it small? They might say it's a small kazayas, which more later one's going to ask and say, wait a second, that's not yarmah b'shiurin, that's yomai b'shiurin. But that's the Gemara's going to ask shortly. But if that's what it means to say, you should write down how much you ate just in case that you might end up being liable. But Vatanya will learn the Brisa, it can't be. Why? The Gemara has a cheshbon why it can't be. The pasuk says, it's talking about the nasi, the king. If he's going to make it a chet, and he's going to do one of the things of Hashem, is God, that should not be done, and he does it bishkaga by mistake, but Ashim, and now he's guilty. So then the halacha of the pasuk says that he has to bring a certain carbon. Now, it sounds like that had he known, he wouldn't have done it. He just did a bishkaga, and therefore for Ashim, therefore he's guilty. So it says the Gemara like this: Hashav miyadiyasai. If someone would repent, he would retract if he was aware. Then maybe carbon ashagugasa. Then he brings the carbon if he does it by mistake. That's what it sounds like. Only because b'shogeg. Okay, then he's ashim. But loisha midiyasa. But had he not retracted, had he known that this was chaylim or whatever it is, then maybe carbon ashagugasa. Then he doesn't bring a carbon for hishkaga. It sounds like only that because that he did it ashaloi says no bishkaga. That should not be done, and he did it bishkaga, then va'ashim, then he's guilty. But if, let's say, he would have been the type of person, and even though he did it by mistake, but had he known about it, he still would have done it, then he doesn't bring the carbon. The carbon's only being brought because he didn't know about it. But if you had known, you would have still done it anyway, even though you're still b'shagig, then you're not bringing carbon. That's not considered as a valid shkaga. Now, so therefore, the problem is, if the court is going to come and make a new halacha and tell you that you're chayiv even on the smaller kazayas, and that's why you tell me you have to write down how much it was, the problem is, would this guy be chayiv? He ate before there was such a halacha that it's a smaller kazayas. So if that's the case, he's not a shev midiyasai, because even had he known that this is chaylev, he still would have eaten it. Because right now we hold, as the Gemara says in Brachas Avlam Testament Aleph, that the liability of halacha of kazayas is only what's called the kazayas aguri, which are medium-sized kazayas. That's how we pass it. So had he known that this is a smaller kazayas, I don't know if he would have eaten it, but he wouldn't have had the compunctions about it because it's not the shiur of chiyuv. Maybe chatzei shiur, also not there, but he wouldn't have held himself back mitzad the knas, mitzad the penalty of the carbon, because we don't hold his liability. So how can you tell me ultimately he has to write down in case there's a court that's going to make it into small kazayas, but that's not shev midiyasai? The only way you're chayiv for a carbon is had you known, you wouldn't have done it. Here, had he known, he still would have done it because it's less than the kazayas of what we consider kazayas, because we pass in the medium-sized kazayas. So why you tell me you should write down that how many ounces it was just in case it's going to be kazayas cotton, and then the later court might be mechayivim? But how could you mechayiv a carbon if anyway he can't bring the carbon because it's not shev midiyasai? It's a little bit of a cheshbon, but the halacha requires that only if you had known you wouldn't have done it. Here, had he known, he still would have done it because in today's time there is no liability for a small kazayas. So why tell me to write down in case the later court says that you're chayiv such a shiur, but it's not shev midiyasai? So the other rather says the Gemara a different interpretation. You're right. The interpretation is no, write down how much you ate because maybe the loy mechayiv carbon. Is gadol. So the opposite. It's saying that if let's say someone eats a medium-sized kazayas, which in today's times we hold that that's the shears, kazayis aguri. There's 3 sizes of olives. So don't write that I'm chayav achatas. Rather write that I ate like a medium-sized olive, because maybe a later court will come along and exempt him, because they're going to pass. They're actually going to rule that it's the larger size eyes to be chayav on. The medium size are exempt. And if you're going to write am chayav achatas, you're not going to remember what it's for, and you're just going to say, okay, Mashiach Timtu, okay, I have to bring a carbon. I wrote down in my pinkers that I did something wrong, and you're going to make chulun to the azara because they're going to pass in the bezin shel Mashiach that you're not chayav. So it's the opposite interpretation. It can't mean that if you ate a kazayas cotton, write down how much in case they'll say you're chayav, because that can't be. You won't be chayav on the chatas, even if they'll pass in that, because you're not shed midiyasai. It's something you would have done even had you been aware in today's times, because today we pass in that you're pater. Rather, it's if you eat a kazayas beinani, which are guri, write down not that you're chayav, rather write down what you ate, because it might actually end up being pater. That's why you should write it down. Now, but then the Gemara has a question.
Let's say right now they're putter for this size. Later on they can make them higher for the same size.
Let's say he's putter for this size.
Right now we're holding that. Let's say this shiur of the size is not going to be high on, right? Or he is going to be high on. Right now they're not high on this.
Which size are you talking about? Because
right,
that's cotton.
Let's say the cotton, or let's say even the beinani or whatever.
No, so the beinani today you would be chayiv.
So
if later on the bezdin paskins that you come to the bezdin and they say no. We're bezdin shel Mashiach. We paskins only kazayis gadol. You eat less than the shear.
Oh, so in case they're going to be they're going to pot.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a case of they're going to be
right. That's what the Gemara's havmina was, which actually Gemara is going to ask on right now in the wording. But the Gemara's havmina was that you'd be chayiv, and the Gemara said you can't be chayiv, because if you would have known today what you're about to eat as chaylev, you would have eaten it anyway, because you know, hey, it's less than the shear. So then you're not considered, even if you did it b'shagig, you can't be chayiv b'chatzah, because it's not shed midiyasai. You wouldn't have stopped yourself, even had you known. Because you say, yeah, it's bachas like a shear. So even if they're going to be mechayiv you, but they can't be mechayiv you because that doesn't qualify for the halacha of shed midiyasai.
It doesn't shed midiyasai at the time of you bringing the korban?
No, it's when you did that veil. Even though you did it by mistake, it's only if had you known you wouldn't have done it. But had I known about it, I would have done it anyway, because it's pachas mekashir. It's less than the kazayis beinani, and today we're not mechayiv you on less than kazayis beinani.
And later on, you can't be mechayiv
right
for what he did at the time of his potter on it.
Right, you technically could, but the problem is not shed midiyasa.
Right, that's what called like Shabbat says.
Right. Okay. But now the Gemara has a technical question. Well, the mind is according to what you originally entertained to say. Mechayiv carbon like kazayas cotton, that you mechayiv sabin a carbon on a small kazayas, because although today we're pater, but you're saying you should write down how much in case it's going to end up being that they're going to hold a more stringent interpretation kazayas cotton, then the wording doesn't make sense. My yabe b'shiurin. What are you saying that they might increase the measurements? To the contrary, they're going to be diminishing the measurements. They're going to make it smaller, which is more of a stringency. So on that says the Gemara, no, you're right. The interpretation is sheniyab b'karbonis, that they might be increasing the amount of karbonis that people bring for sins, machmas shiurin, because they actually diminish the measurement. So it's not really, don't read it yab b'shiurin, yab b'karbonis, because of the diminishment of the size of the shiur. Now continuing on this theme regarding shiurim, Amar B'yichan, it says shiurin b'oishin. The halachas of measurements, which someone just brought up before, halacha of measurements and of punishments, halacha Moshe Sinai are oral tradition from Moshe from Sinai. So that says the Gemara, Einshin Nechtav Ksivi. What do you mean? How can you tell halacha Moshe Sinai? Einshin in the Torah are written. It says in the Torah what punishments are. It says you get malchus. It says you get Mrs. Bezdin. So halacha rather says the Gemara, no, that's what Amar B'yichan. He was saying shiurin shel einshin. It's not two different statements. It's the measurements of punishments, which meaning for the amount of that what you're doing, that because of that you'll get a punishment, that's halacha Moshe Sinai. That's halacha Moshe Sinai. What is the measurement to get the punishment? But the actual punishment says in the Torah. But the measurement of how much you have to do to be liable for that, that's halacha Moshe Sinai. And the Bryce is shiurin shel einshin. The measurements of the punishments are halacha Moshe Sinai. The halacha that's oral halacha for Moshe Sinai. The others say that Bezdina Sheyavitz Tiknam. It's actually not Lamach Moshe Sinai, but actually Asniel ben Kanaz, he was the one who instituted this shiur. Says the Gemara, how could you say that? For Ksiv, it says a pasuk in Vayikra, Elah mitzvahs. These are the mitzvahs that Hashem commanded to Moshe Rabbeinu in Har Sinai. What do you mean? These are the mitzvahs. These is a mir to tell you Shein Nabi Rishon Lachadash Zav Me'at. No prophet can introduce any new halachas. How could he tell you that these are the shiurim? All the halachas have been told from Moshe from Sinai. So the Gemara know what the Achir meant. Moshe Shalchum, they actually forgot. Yeah, it could have been halachas Moshe from Sinai, but they forgot them. The Chazub Yostem, and then from Pilpula Yobas Nilban Kanaz, he went and he was able to derive from his drushes what exactly was the original halacha. He didn't introduce anything new. He just brought back the old. Now he said in the Mishnah, up until now we spoke about the shiur of achila of kriseves agas of a large date. Now we're talking about hashaysim le'lugma. If someone drinks a cheekful, so that's what the Mishnah said. There's a michayev for drinking on Yom Kippurim for violating the inah. Now I'm going to give Mishmol, a very important qualification. It says le'lugma of mamash. It doesn't literally say that his cheekfuls are full. Rather, if you're going to take whatever you're drinking that's in your mouth and you're going to move it to one side, to one cheek, it's going to look like you have your cheekfuls, that is the halacha of malay lugma. And that place compares to other places too, like we have by Kiddush. It has to be actually not both cheekfuls, but only one cheekful. It says, it says his cheekfuls. So Amos says, no, it's like the cheekfuls, because if you fill up one side all the way, it looks like that as if your mouth is full, but really it's not both sides. It's only you have the amount of liquid that if you had moved it to one side, it would look like it's full. That's the shiur, which is obviously much smaller than if both cheeks full, and that's some of the rice that Taisa has for other places like Kiddush. Now, Meisver the Gemara, however, asks from the following brisa. Brisa says, "Kama yishta b'yichayev." How much does the person drinking Yom Kippurim that is going to be chayev for drinking? So b'shama, they say revius, it's a quarter of a leg. Ubisilam, they say malay lugmav, the cheekfuls. Yudam Mishum Rabbi Lazar, the question is from Beisil. Yudam Mishum Rabbi Lazar says kimalay lugmav, like a cheekful. Yudam Rabbi Yomi says kidei gemia, the amount of a swallow. So you see that Beisil says malay lugmav. So the Gemara says, what do you want? Made different than the sneeze. Is that any better than our Mishnah? Our Mishnah also said the same words malay lugmav. The kinder kadei shiur, which we said that it doesn't really mean cheekful, that it should look like cheekful, which is when you move it to one side, it would fill up one whole cheek. So it's the amount that it looks like. So what are you asking? Says the no, but of course, if that's what Beisila means, Hein Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar, one of the other opinions, he says Kimalay Lugma. Obviously, Beisila says Malay Lugma is not Kimalay Lugma. Says the no, it's not difficult. Beisila is also Kimalay Lugma. But it could be now the difference between them is Malay Lugma Dachuk. A type of malay lugma that's tight, which is, according to Beisil, you need to have that you can move that beverage, that liquid, to one side of your mouth, and it's going to look like a wide malay lugma, expansive malay lugma. According to Rabbi Lazar, it's even if it's a tightly pressed malay lugma, I mean, full up, but not as big. So both of them agree it's malay lugma, and if it's not difficult on Beisil, both of them are saying that it's kamalay lugma. The question is it kamalay lugma dachub or kamalay lugma revach? And therefore that's the machlekes between them, but it doesn't refute our interpretation that no one's saying that it has to be both cheeks are full. It's only that if you moved it to one side, it would fill up that whole cheek. That would already violate the halacha of drinking Yom Kippur. Now, the Gemara starts a series of questions regarding this halacha. Masber Rav Hishir. The Rav Hishir says in Cain, if that's the case, that according to Beis Hill, you're telling me that you mechayev as long as you move it to one side of your mouth. Now, that's less than a revius. So if that's the case, Bishamay had said, how much is the shiur of drinking Yom Kippurim? They said it's a revius. Basil said, malay lugma. Now, if you say, and this is a place to discuss also to show the shiur, if you say that malay lugma is both cheeks, so that's more than the revius. So if that's the case, so Basil is going to be more lenient, right? Because the larger the shiur, the less liability. You have to drink more to be chai. But if you tell me it's only one cheekful, so Beishami is more lenient, Basil is more machmer. So the question is, it should have been said in Mesech Idiyos by the leniency of Beishami, because generally Beishami was more machmer. So why doesn't it mention this case then over there to tell you that Beis Hill was more machmer? So now I'm letting Gemara is a very creative answer as we continue to the days that no. Key issue, when was this question asked in the Beis Medrash, which recorded in the Brisa, that how much does a person have to drink to be chai, which we have all these different opinions, Beisham, Beisil, and all those other ones, was actually ba'oig melech habashim itself. It was asked regarding a very large person That actually Bishama is more stringent. Why? Because he holds you Michayiv even by a revius, which is smaller than a cheekful, because very big person, has a huge cheek, and therefore even filling up just one cheek is Beis Hillel is going to be the linear interpretation, and therefore that's why it's not mentioned with the Masechta Sidi. But the Gemara continues to ask similar type of questioning on the primary halacha itself. Maskul Zayr, it says, Ma'ishna achila. Why is eating different? We said in the Mishnah that every single person, he violates inu of eating in Kippurim if he has the size of a date. What's different drinking where it's not uniform? Every single person depends on the size of his cheek. It's his cheek full. So, but why is eating different than drinking in that way? That eating, everyone is going to be with the size of a large date. But drinking, it depends on the type of person you are. How big are your cheeks? So if you're going to be liable for drinking, you can perm. So my Rabbi says, I'll tell you why. The rabbis, they knew regarding the date, that calms a person down. Less than that doesn't calm a person down. He's still afflicted. Whereas by drinking, they knew that it's regarding the person's own cheek, that will calm him down. But the size of his friend's cheek is not going to calm him down. And therefore, eating and drinking are different. And Chazal knew that difference, that one would be relative and one would be objective. But Maskul Zayr says, I don't understand. You tell me the whole entire world that they'll use a keseves, just the size of a large date, to calm them down. He sneezes, it looks like a poppy seed for him, this date. That's going to calm him down? And he's a huge person. So Abai says, yes, Rabbanan knew that this is going to calm him down. Less than that's not going to calm him down. Now, however, you're right. Kula Tuva, the whole entire world, everyone in the world, Tuva, will calm them down a lot. Important, to calm down a little bit, but it will do something of Yisuv Hadas. So therefore, yes, everyone is going to do somewhat of a violation of Inui. It's a longer spectrum, but it's going to do something on that spectrum. For many people, it's going to do something significant. For Oig, it's going to do something very small. Now, Maskul Zayr asks a similar type of a question. He says, I don't understand. Basar shaman, if again, Kesevis, we're not really talking about no one's eating a date necessarily. It's just a shiur of achila. So you're telling me basar shaman, fatty meat, a geschmack steak. But Kesevis is the shiur of a large date. V'lolavi gavan Kesevis and eating palm fronds, eating hearts of palm, that's also going to calm you down the size of a date. How's that possible? One's like a geschmack of protein, and the other one has just some juice and some sap from a tree, right? How's it the same? So my Rabbi says, yes, Rabbanan understood. This measurement calms a person down. Less than this doesn't calm a person down. Now, you're right. Basar sham and tuva. If you eat fatty meat, that's going to calm you down a lot. The love of gavan and palm frond is going to do a little bit, but it's always going to do something if you have the shiur of a kaisevis. No matter what the person size is, no matter what the food type is, it's going to do something. Now, Rabbi has another question. He says, okay, kizayis b'chtech is pras. We know generally the halacha is, I think what it tells us in Kristav Yud Beis Mabeis, all types of isurim, that the measurement is the shiur of a kizayis of an olive, that if you waited the amount of time from when you started eating that food item, you waited the amount of time to finish it, more than what's called kedei achilas pras, then it's not going to combine for you to be liable until you eat the whole shiur in the amount of time that it takes to eat one meal's worth, which that's eating a half of a loaf, which they used for the halachas of Erevin, which is the meal size of 2 meals. As the Mishnah teaches, that the reason why is because the Erev, the halacha is you have to make that your shvisa. Where's your shvisa? Where are you spending Shabbos? When you're eating at least 2 sudas. You have to have 2 meals worth, because that's where you have to have on Shabbos besides Shalosh Sudas. So that's the halacha of a loaf. Half of that loaf is the amount of lebeis hamanuga, for if you have a house that has a nega. The reason for that is because the pasuk makes it dependent that your garments become tummy when you enter the house of a nega, the amount of time that it takes to eat half of a loaf, which is 1 meal's worth. So the halacha is generally to be liable on the kazayas is only if you eat it within like 2 to 9 minutes, which is the amount of time that it takes to eat a half of a loaf, which is really 1 meal's worth of bread. Now, and you tell me that also that the halacha of Yom Kippurim, which the shiur of eating Yom Kippurim is not that of an olive, it's more the amount of eating a date. There also, you tell me that the food is going to combine to be liable if you're eating an amount of time of Chedecheles Pras, and if you delay more than this, it's not going to combine, you're going to be pater. But the problem is, but since it's a larger shiur, it's a larger quantity, then you should have to have a larger amount of time lapse to combine his eating, which now it's a leniency the way you're saying it, because you're exempting him. If let's say it took him more than 9 minutes, let's say in 10 minutes, he ate the shiur b'kiseves. Oh, it's pater. But why? If a kizayis, which is less than the kiseves, is the amount of time that's how much time you're giving him. So in a larger quantity, you should give him more time. So why is it the same amount of time for a larger quantity of food? So again, the same type of an answer. Kimul Rabbanan, the Rabbanan knew the Bahacham Yasvadaita. Yeah, that if you're going to have an amount of a kiseves in the amount of time of Chedecheles Pras, between 2 and 9 minutes, that's going to calm you down. But if you're going to wait longer than that, if you're going to eat a little bit of crumb here, and it's going to be more than Chedecheles Pras, it's not going to calm a person down. And Yom Kippurim, like we said in the previous Daf, it depends on Yishuv Hadas, as the pasuk says that Shaloi Su'una. That's the primary criterion, and never the Chazal knew they're also on this idea. But Masechta Rava has another question on this thing. He says, because Seves of Yom Kippurim, the halacha is you're telling me is B'chtecheles Pras. Okay, it's the amount of time you're eating a half a loaf of bread. Chatzi Pras, which is a quarter of a loaf, which is half of a loaf, which is the shiur of making a person's body invalidated for someone who ate tamei foods, which is a half of a pras. So then his body becomes puzzled from eating truma. Now, a half of a pras is a large measurement, like 2 large eggs, as the Gemara says, Eirvin Daf Pegimel and Aleph. There also, we mentioned the amount of time of how much delay that it'll combine. That's also B'chtecheles Pras and not more. Now, since it's a large measurement, so again, you should have combined it even more than that, because here it's regarding Tumas Eichel, has nothing to do regarding, it's regarding a person eats tamei foods, which Taisa discusses that there was 2 different stages in this halacha. But the point is that it has nothing to do with calming a person down. So why over here would you say that when it's 2 eggs worth, that it's also going to be if you eat the tamei foods in the amount of Chedecheles Pras? Why? It's much more than the kizayis. A kabei is more than the kizayis. 2 kabeim is definitely more than the kizayis. So why are you saying only if the person ate tamei foods in the amount of tamei Chedecheles Pras, then he's going to be considered as tamei to have this psul of geviyah that where he's puzzled for truma? If it should be much more of a time span to combine. So the Papa says, nah, hanach l'tumas geviyah. Don't ask me from the tumah of a person's body. The lav deraisa is not biblical halacha, and therefore the rabbis were lenient. You're right. They said that only if you can have an amount of 2 to 9 minutes, that amount of 2 eggs worth of tamei food, only then will you become tamei. But longer than that, since it's only rabbinic law, they weren't so stringent. But the Gemara asked them, the Yoma Daf, did Papa really say that the halacha of tumas geviyah is only rabbinic? But V'ksiv, there's a passage says in Yikra, it says, you should not become tamei, you should not become defiled in them. If they tamtim bam, and then you'll become clogged up with them. Which this is by the eating, where it says al tashaktus nafshay seichem, which is talking about eating, and it says which this is not talking about a warning about tumah, because the Yisrael, a non-kohen, is not prescripted about becoming tamei, because as the pasuk says in Parashat Emma Kahanim, only Kahanim are forewarned about becoming tamei, not Yisrael. So what are we saying? What does it mean not to become tamei of them? So rather it's warning regarding eating tamei foods, and then it's been a tamtim bam, because it sounds like through eating them you're going to become tamei. So it's not a problem about becoming tamei; it's you're allowed to become tamei, but now eat tamei foods because then you're going to have the psul of geviyah. Where V'amra Papa says on this pasuk, the same Rav Papa says, "Mekan tumas geviyah." Here we see that the tumah of a person's body by eating food items that are tamei is deraisa biblical law. So how could he say, don't ask from me from this halacha psul geviyah, which when you eat tamei foods, that then your problem of coming in contact with truma? What do you mean? You tell me they're rabban, never they were lenient, but Rabbi himself said it's deraisa in explanation of this pasuk. Says the Gemara, no, it's not true. It's really midrabanan, because the pasuk is not actually coming to tell you anything regarding tuma, because there is nothing that contaminates a person through eating. The only exception is a nevela of a kosher bird. It's the only thing that contaminates a person through eating. This halacha that was saying when the person eats tummy foods, he becomes tummy and it's a problem with truma. It's not just rabbinic law. But cross machta ba'alma. And even a papa saying, oh, that from here we have a source tumas gvid deraisa, it doesn't mean it's really biblical. It's just an illusion for the rabbinic law. But it's not really deraisa, and again, therefore, we could be lenient. Now, as Rashi points out, because the primary pasuk actually was expounded in the Lam Testament Aleph, that is actually more of an agadic teaching. That it repeats to Tamu with the Tamtem to tell him that if a person contaminates himself a little bit, from Shemaim they're going to contaminate him a lot. But again, therefore, it's not a question from that halacha why when there's 2 eggs worth is also in the shikha of this part, because it's rabbinic law, they were lenient and say, yeah, even though it's a large quantity, if you don't have it within 2 to 9 minutes, it's not going to have the halacha of tumas gvir. Now we continue with the halacha that the Mishnah said, that we said kala eichlin. We said that all food items that they combine for the shiur of keseves, so it could be a little bit of a pickle, it could be a little bit of a carrot, whatever it is, will combine for the shiur of a large date. And we said we said also a little bit of beer, a little bit of wine, a little bit of water. Those are going to combine for the shiur of a shikful. And we said, however, but we said that, but if you eat and you drink, so that's what the Gemara is going to discuss right now. Amr Papa says, someone eats a piece of meat and the salt on top of it. Mitzdarf, the salt combines for the shiur of a kaiseves. Now, although salt would not make one person liable for eating, but but since people eat it this way with meat and the salt on top of it, so mitzdarf is going to combine for the shiur of achila. So Domer Shlakish says, Tzir Shal Gabi Yarek says when you have the dressing, the vinegar on the vegetables, vinaigrette, so mitzdarf like a keseves, but that combines for the shiur of the keseves for eating in Yom Kippur. So the Gemara Pshita, obviously, what I mean, it's like the same of the previous halacha. So the Gemara, no. What you say, the vinaigrette is a liquid. And we said that liquids and solids don't combine. So it wouldn't make you liable for the shiur of keseves. Oh, Kamashmalon, that's what we're teaching you know, whatever liquid, whatever beverage is coming to sweeten the food item, is coming to prepare the food, it's a dressing, that's what a dressing is, it dresses up the food item. So uchlu has a halachic status as the food item itself, and therefore it's going to make it's going to be mitzdarf actually for the shiur of the keseves. Another teaching for Amr Shlakish on this theme, he says, someone overeats on Yom Kippur, meaning, like Rashi says, a very practical case, that he ate Yom Kippurim on Yom Kippur night when he was already stuffed, because he had from the Sudam of Sekes, but before the Sudam of Sekes, a very, very worried, very concerned individual. How am I going to last all these hours of fasting? So the guy stuffs himself, and now whatever he eats Yom Kippur by night is obviously achila gasa, because it's overeating, and he's not even having pleasure from this. So then Potter is actually exempt from eating Yom Kippur. My time, what's the reason? Because the pasuk says that if a person violates and he's not afflicted, meaning he's going to eat something that's going to give him pleasure, that's going to take away the affliction, that's violating eating Yom Kippur. Well, prat lamazik, that excludes something that harms this person, where it's not taking away any inu by eating this. To the contrary, if anything, it's harming him and the food, Rashi says. Like masik is just wasting everything. It's wasting himself or wasting the food. It's harming everything. There's no constructive act in this eating, and therefore that's not considered a violation of Shalei Sulam. Similarly, Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg says, Zar Sha'achal Truma. A non-Kohen eats Truma by mistake, which generally the pasuk requires you to pay back the principal and an additional fifth. However, if he eats it achila gasa, where he's already stuffed and already had by the barbecue already had 7 steaks, and already had 4 burgers, and already had 3 franks, and then someone offers him something he never tasted before, and he's already nimbus already, has no room, and then the guy gives him a truma hamburger, he eats achila gasa, so mashamas can, he'll have to pay back the principal, because ultimately he was masik truma, but he does not have to pay back the additional fifth. What's the reason? Because Kiyaychel, the pasuk says, if you're going to eat, that's problematic. That excludes if you're damaging the truma. It's not considered eating, it's like just taking the burger and throwing it into the garbage. That's the same thing. It's not considered an act of achila when it's achila gasa. So too, Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, he says, Zar, you continue to have a pay alf and alf. A non-kohen shekaisis, which generally anything that you're eating in not the normal way is called kaisis, like chewing, but it's not really eating. If you choose sa'orim shel truma, barley of truma, mishal mesakeren, vein mishal mesachaimish. So he pays the principal, but he does not pay the fifth. Why? Because Kiyechot says that you're only liable for eating truma, prat lamazik. If you're just damaging truma, of course you have to pay back the principal because you're a mazik, but you didn't do an act of eating because eating barley straight uncooked, well, that's not considered as an act of eating. So now, however, in spite of this, Amr of Yechon, it says Zar Shabala Shazifin, a non-kohen who swallows prunes, shal truma, which he swallowed without chewing. A very interesting case. The king, now he vomits it up, he spits it out. V'achan achan, and someone else eats this guy's prunes that he swallowed without chewing. So interesting. Rishon misham ker mechemish. The first one's going to have to pay the principal and the fifth because, as Rashi tells us, that for prunes, it is considered normal to swallow it without chewing. So therefore, you did an act of achila, and you have to pay the principal and the fifth. Sheni, the second guy, ein mashal ma'odemei eitzin l'rishon l'vad. The second guy pays to the first guy only what would be like the price of firewood for fuel. Because what happened is that the first guy who violated the law of eating truma, he already acquired it, and he became obligated to pay the amount of damaging truma by eating it. So yeah, the first guy has to give the principal an additional fifth. But now, once the guy already swallowed the prunes and then he spit it back up, now no one's going to eat this now. The value of it is only that you could use it as firewood to throw it onto the pot that's cooking and use it as fuel. So therefore the second guy who ended up eating it, he only damaged from the first guy, and therefore that's all he has to pay. The first guy is that amount. Thank you for any time.
The shiur that we came